It's my great pleasure to introduce George Green.
Before we get started, I would like you all to kind of put yourself in a meditative state. Just kind of sit and relax for a second. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to visualize and demand that all dark energies leave our space. That's enough. We're pretty powerful. What I'm going to do tonight, as you know, my name's George Green. I was born in Denver, Colorado, for people who do not know. My father was in the meatpacking business. I was raised in a packing house. As a kid, I did everything that you could do to animals because that's what our family did. As I grew up, I learned a healthy respect for life at a point, and I couldn't do it anymore. But as I'm going through this game, and we're talking about I'm going to give you tonight, is a new awareness, what I'm going to hope you're aware. And I used kind of an old game thing that I'm going to show you tonight. I'm going to see how aware the audience is for 1 second. Everybody familiar with this? Oh, yeah. What is it?
FedEx.
How many in here can raise your hand now and see the arrow in the FedEx? There's only a few of you.
EX.
It's between the E and the X. Can you see it? And now you see it? Okay, I'm going to put it right down here. Put my arm around it. See, there's an arrow. Right there. Now can you see it? Now a minute ago it was there, wasn't it? But you didn't see it. Tonight I want to try to explain things to you, like what happened when we started out the presentation. Basically, I said to demand that all dark energy leave our space. Guys, we are living in a multidimensional position, and the war is on right now. War is not only on for the physical dimension, but also for the non-physical dimension. And I'm going to share a little bit of my background because as I was working in the packing house with my dad, I reached a point where I was working in the finance end of it. My dad, let me give you a little bit of background of the meat industry. As the packing house goes out and purchases animals from the farmer, the Packers and Stockyards Act means when we buy the cow, for instance, we have to pay for it in 24 hours. My dad, however, was one of these philanthropic type of people, was trying to help everybody. So we had what we call the government school lunch program. You're all familiar with that, the hamburger? Well, what we would do would be process these animals, and we would sell the processed meat to the schools, to the government. Now, my dad had to pay for the cows in 24 hours. When do you think the government had to pay us?
90 days.
Roughly 90 days.
Yeah.
Well, we were dealing in millions of dollars, and the problem involved with this was to getting adequate financing, because once we shipped the product to the government, it was gone, and we needed it. During that period of time, I became our family friends when everything were senators and congressmen and bankers, and so I used to go to all the bankers and borrow the money from them based on accounts receivable. So you people that are involved with banking understand that it was a pretty simple process. Except for there was this one other thing that went on, and that was that the bankers could only loan a certain amount based on what they had in their asset base. So as it turned out in Denver, on 17th Street, almost every bank I had borrowed the legal limit. In fact, one day I was in Metro Bank and I asked Dick Singwald, I says, I'm out of money, right? I have to start going out of the city if I'm going to borrow money. And I says, let me go talk to your boss if I can. And he says, he won't talk to you. And I said, well, set it up. His boss was Marvin Davis. So who you know, maybe some of you know who bought the Beverly Hills Hotel, bought the theater. He's recently died. Anyway, I went over and asked to borrow some money from him, and he said no, he wouldn't do it. And that was my first acquaintance with what I call real specialized, if you call control of people out here in the system. You're either one of them or you're not. And we were not. At any rate, one of my other bank friends says, I'll tell you what, we'll loan you all the money if you can help us. We need some deposits. And you have a lot of friends with money. He says, look, why don't you get some of your friends to put money into our bank, and if you do that, then we'll loan you more money. And I said, well, explain this process to me. And he says, okay, this is what we'll do. And I said, I'll tell you what, let's do a better deal. Everybody in here is aware of how banks put in full-page ads for advertising for CDs. You put in $10,000, we're going to pay you, 4 or 5% interest. What I did was made an agreement to the bank that if they would pay me 3% of all the money that I raised for them, we would contract, I would put in $1 million or $2 million or $5 million. It didn't make any difference to me. Now, what I would do was go out and contact you and say, hey, you've got money sitting in the bank and it's drawing 5%. How about making more money? What I would do is write out a check to you in advance for 2%. Understand the game? So you got 5% from the bank, federal FDIC insured. I'm not going to say it's federal government because FDIC is a private corporation. But it was insured. And the next thing has happened, the word came around that I could put all kinds of money into banks. So all of a sudden throughout the whole United States, I had literally millions of dollars coming into my office, and I was selling it to banks all over the place. I then got a letter, I got contacted from the state of Colorado, said that the guys upstairs decided that I needed to be licensed to sell what I was doing. So I said, well, what kind of license is there to sell money? And what is money? Anybody here know what money is? They don't. They really do not know what money is. There are definitions of money in there. I have the New World Order's bank book. They don't give you a specific answer for that. At any rate, what happened is we decided, me and the securities department decided that money was the security. So I said, well, give me the worst exam that you possibly can. I love exams. My background, I told you a little bit, was in engineering and law. Right, you didn't know about the law part. But anyway, I went ahead and took the exam, and I became a registered financial principal. I then applied to the NASD and set up my own firm, and then I hired 3 attorneys to keep track of all the money was coming in. So then I had, the Federal Reserve made a mistake one day, gave me an extra $1 million. Woke up in the morning, 2 guys in black suits come walking in and said, George, we got a problem. And I said, what problem? They said, well, we gave you $1 million too much. Well, I didn't even know about it, And I said, I don't care. And I said, well, what do you want? He said, well, you need to sign this thing. So I did, and I gave them back their $1 million. The next day they came in and they gave me a little plastic lucite tube. It's about 3 by 4 inches, and it's full of 16th century Siamese porcelain coins. That's my remembering of the day I gave them back $1 million. Everything is running great for a while, but the feds found out that I had a lot of power. And let me give you an illustration. I found from the bank, if I put in $5 million into the bank, they could loan out 20 times that million, or $100 million. If I only paid 5% interest, and that's all they did on the $1 million, and they paid out $50,000, right? That's all they did. But if they loaned out this $1 million out there, or $100 million that or $20 million that they had at 5%, their return was $1 million. So they could make $1 million in just profit on the $1 million that they ended up having that we put into the banks. Well, what happened is in the next scenario, this went on for a period, except for at the end of 1 year, that's when your certificate came up for renewal. Don't you go down and call your bank and get your money and all that kind of good stuff? Who did you call to roll over your certificate? You called me. And what happened is I called the bank president, and if he wouldn't pay me the 3% again, I would move that money out of the bank. Now the bank had already loaned based on their deposits to other people. Now I had nothing to do with the bank other than putting deposits in, but I became so powerful I could break the bank. What occurred then was the feds decided that they wanted me basically to do some other things, and they sent a letter to every bank in the United States not to do business with me. I'm a little creative, so the savings and loans were wide open. So I moved to the S&L business until I found out what a scam that was going and how the Insight Group, you all remember how the savings and loan all went bankrupt? Well, at that time I was a real estate developer. I was doing all kinds of stuff. I built shopping centers, office buildings, motels, and restaurants in
Guys like you, or why they went bankrupt?
22 states. I didn't do it.
They didn't do it.
No, I tell you what, but it's close. You know, at Silverado, I went down to Silverado Savings in Denver. Y'all remember that? Jeb Rush was involved. I asked for a $100 million loan. This was a project I was on. And they said, yeah, they'd give me the loan. And then 2 days later, I come back down, and Jeb happened to be in town. And they said, we decided to give you the loan, but we're going to increase the fees to 5%. I said, what are you talking about? You know, 5 points. You guys all borrow money from banks. You usually charge a point or 2 points. I was willing to pay a point at that time. Anyway, they wanted $5 million up front. I said, wait a minute, I don't need to do that. So I backed out of Silverado, went across the street and got it from Capital Federal. But it didn't make any difference to me. Then I flew up to Aspen. The guys decided that they wanted me on the inner group. I got up to Aspen, Colorado. I brought my 2 daughters with me. And you all have seen the video of what happened there. I came up to Aspen, goes into this room, and I'm sitting in here looking around like you guys. There wasn't that many there, but the world leaders were there. And I said, what am I doing here? And they said, well, we've decided we want you to be the finance chairman for the next president of the United States. I said, why me? They said, well, we owe you a favor. The favor was, prior to doing that, I was volunteering to act as president of companies. And what I would do is go get rid of the expendable containers, that's you, and we would split the spoils as I divided the companies. But I never charged for anything. This was just a huge monopoly game to me. And we reached a mental attitude if you weren't smart enough to get up to where we were to deserve what you're going to get. That was all of their attitudes. It was just you are just nothing. Today, at the old days, you were considered expendable containers. Dr. Coleman refers to you as useless eaters. Today, you're nothing more than what we call a human resource or a commodity. If you go look at it, we've got to make the names right. Anyways, I'm in the room, I'm saying,